Hello, my dear friends. You are standing in the thin, cold air, high in the Andes, waiting. Before you, the world is a sea of dark, sleeping mountain peaks, their edges just beginning to catch a faint, ghostly light. The stones beneath your feet are frigid, and every breath you take is a sharp reminder of just how high you are, how far from the familiar, soft world below. You're here for a sunrise, but if this were 500 years ago, you most certainly would not survive this experience with your soul, or your back, intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support is deeply appreciated, but your quiet rest is the most important thing tonight. Imagine yourself there now. Find that comfortable spot in your bed. Let your own world fade into shadow, and allow the chill of the mountain air to be replaced by the warmth of your blankets. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You have made the final push. The last few steps of the climb are the hardest. Your lungs burn, a tiny fire in your chest demanding more air than this high, thin atmosphere is willing to give. Your legs are heavy, protesting the ascent over the uneven stone steps that pave the path. You are climbing to a place called Inti Punku, the Sun Gate. Mist, damp and cool, clings to the air, swirling around you like a living thing, obscuring the view and then parting for a tantalizing second to reveal a sheer, green drop into a valley you cannot see the bottom of. The silence here is profound. It's a heavy, weighted silence, broken only by your own breathing and the soft whisper of the wind moving through the corsicue grass. And then, you arrive. Before you is a simple stone structure, a doorway that frames the sky. It feels less like a gate and more like a window into heaven. You turn and look through it, down toward the saddle of the mountain below, and there it is. Machu Picchu. It's still cloaked in the deep blue shadows of pre-dawn, a ghost of a city perched impossibly between two jagged, emerald peaks. It doesn't look real. It looks like a dream someone forgot to wake up from. You wait. The sky begins to blush, a soft violet turning to a pale, hopeful pink. And then it happens. The first ray of sunlight, a brilliant, piercing spear of liquid gold, crests the distant peak. It shoots through the sun gate, a perfect cosmic alignment, and strikes the city below. The grey stone walls, which a moment ago were cold and lifeless, ignite. They drink in the light, transforming into a labyrinth of glowing, golden architecture. The illusion is perfect. It's a city built by the sun god, Inti, for his children. A place that simply appeared, as if the mountain itself willingly gave up its stone, shaping itself into these perfect terraces, these elegant walls, these sacred temples. It's a breathtaking lie. A glorious, golden, and utterly convincing deception. You see divine harmony, effortless creation, a city that grew from the living rock as naturally as a flower. This is the glamorous image, the one that history and 1,000 photographs have sold you. A lost city, serene and mystical, waiting patiently for the sun's daily kiss. But I want you to lean closer now. Listen past the whisper of the wind, and you hear it. A faint, rhythmic sound, echoing from the past. It's not the sound of chanting or of panpipes. It's the relentless, percussive clink, clink, clink of stone on stone. Now, let's shatter the illusion. Let's look at a single one of those glowing blocks in the wall of the Temple of the Sun. It weighs several tons. It is fitted against its neighbors with such precision that you could not slide a blade of grass between them. It looks seamless, perfect. But it was not grown. It was not conjured. It was born of sweat, pain, and an almost unimaginable amount of human effort. Imagine the man who shaped this stone. He isn't a mystical priest communing with the mountain. He is a farmer from a village hundreds of miles away, called here by a mandatory public service, a labor tax called the mitter. He has no iron tools, no chisel, no steel hammer. His only tools are other stones, river cobbles harder than the granite he is working. For 10, 12 hours a day, he sits, or crouches, or stands, and he pounds. He chips away at the massive granite block, flake by tiny flake. His hands are raw, his knuckles bloody. The fine, abrasive dust fills his lungs, a slow, gritty poison. His back screams in protest. This isn't artistry in the way we think of it. It is a battle of attrition. It is a war of soft human flesh against hard, unforgiving geology, and shaping the stone was only the beginning. Now it had to be moved. There are no wheels here. No beasts of burden strong enough to pull a 10-ton block. There is only rope, woven from the fibers of the agave plant, and men. Hundreds of them. They strain together, bare feet finding purchase on steep, rocky ground. Ropes bite into their shoulders and hands. Muscles tear. Hernias bloom in their bellies. A single slip, a moment of lost coordination, and the stone could slide, crushing limbs, crushing bodies, pinning men to the mountainside. Every perfect wall, every graceful terrace, is built upon a foundation of this brutal, bone-breaking toil. The gold you see in the sunrise is a fleeting illusion. The true price of this city was paid in calluses, in aching joints, in shortened lives. It's a city built not just from living stone, but from the slow erosion of human bone. So why would anyone do this? Why endure such hardship for a royal estate, a city in the clouds? Because to the Inca, this was not just construction, it was cosmology. The Sapa Inca was the son of the sun god. To build for him was to serve the divine, to maintain the very order of the universe. This brutal labor was a sacred duty, a form of worship more potent than any prayer. Each swing of the stone hammer, each heave on the thick rope, was an offering. They believed the mountains themselves, the great Apus, were living deities who had to be honored. Building upon their slopes, using their stone, was a negotiation with these powerful beings. The sacrifice of human energy, of human comfort, was part of that negotiation. They were not merely building a city, they were anchoring the heavens to the earth through sheer, collective will. As the sun climbs higher, the golden light fades to the honest, bright light of day. The magic recedes, and the raw, magnificent reality sets in. You run a hand over one of those perfectly fitted stones. It's cool and smooth, the join with its neighbor so tight it feels like a single, solid piece. You can feel the immense weight, the permanence, but now you know the secret it holds. You can almost feel the phantom ache of the muscles that pulled it here, hear the faint, ghostly echo of the hammer that shaped it. The Inca believed the stones themselves were alive, that they could grow tired, that they had a spirit. They believed a stone had to be persuaded, not just broken, from its home in the quarry. And that process, that strange and difficult conversation with the living rock, began long before the first ray of sun ever touched its finished face. You trace the line where two massive stones meet. It's not a straight line. It flows, it curves, it dips and rises like a living thing. There is no mortar here, nothing to fill the gaps, because there are no gaps. The stones are fused together, locked in a dry, perfect embrace. This is the great illusion of Inca architecture, the one that fools the eye and baffles the mind. It doesn't look like it was built. It looks like it was grown. You wander down a narrow alleyway in Cusco, the old imperial capital, and you see walls that bulge outwards, soft and organic, as if the stone was once clay, molded by giant hands and then fired into permanence. You stop before the famous 12-angled stone. It's a masterpiece of complex geometry, a single, grey-green diorite block interlocking with its 11 neighbours in a seemingly chaotic yet utterly stable puzzle. The public image is one of impossible skill, of a lost technology, of masons who were more like magicians. They must have had a secret, we think. A way to soften the stone, perhaps, or a laser-like precision that defies belief. It's a beautiful, elegant mystery. But the secret wasn't a technology. It was a belief. And it's far stranger, and more visceral, than you can imagine. Let's leave the pristine city walls and travel to the place of their violent birth, the quarry. Picture a great, raw scar on the side of a mountain. The air is thick with granite dust that coats your tongue and makes your eyes water. The sun beats down, reflecting off the pale rock with a blinding glare. The sound is deafening, not just the clink, clink, clink of hundreds of hammers, but the deep, resonant groan of massive stones being shifted on wooden rollers, the shouting of foremen, the cracking of ropes. It is a place of brute force and raw power. But look closer. In the midst of this industrial chaos, there is a quiet, strange ritual taking place. A priest, or a shaman, stands before a half-quarried monolith, a massive block of andesite still attached by a thread of rock to the mountainside. He is not holding a tool. He is holding a small, decorated bag of coca leaves. He takes a wad of the leaves, chews them slowly, mixing them with saliva and a bit of ash, until they form a bitter green pulp. Then, with great ceremony. He leans forward and spits the pulpy wood directly onto the stone. He murmurs a prayer, an incantation. Another man approaches, holding a clay pot. He pours a stream of chicha, a cloudy, sacred corn beer, over the rock, letting the liquid trickle down its face, darkening the stone and leaving a sour, fermented smell in the dusty air. Sometimes, for a particularly large or important stone, a llama would be sacrificed, its blood smeared across the rock face as a more potent offering. This is the shocking reality. They are not just quarrying a rock. They are capturing a god. To the Inca, stones were not inert matter. They were huka sacred objects, imbued with a spirit, a life force. They were the children, or the bones, of the great mountain apus, and they did not want to leave their home. The chronicles of the Spanish conquest are filled with tales of this belief. They speak of stones that were considered alive, that had names, that were worshipped. They tell of the Inca belief that stones could become tired on their journey from the quarry to the city. The Quechua word for it is say tired stones. A tired stone would refuse to move. It would break ropes, crush workers, and bring progress to a halt until it was properly rested and fed with more offerings. There's a famous legend of a massive stone being dragged to Cusco that was said to have wept tears of blood and lamented its fate, killing thousands of the men trying to move it before it finally gave up and refused to go any further. It was left by the side of the road, a defeated, living deity. This wasn't just a charming superstition. It was the fundamental why of their entire engineering process. Their worldview was one of reciprocity, of Aini. The universe was a constant, delicate negotiation between humans and a world that was powerfully, divinely alive. You didn't just take from Pachamama, the Earth Mother. You asked her permission. You gave her something in return. When you removed one of her bones or stunner, you had to appease her, and the stone itself. The offerings of coca, chicha, and blood were not symbolic. They were food. They were a bribe. They were a necessary transaction to placate the powerful spirit you were disturbing. To ignore this ritual was to invite disaster. Landslides, earthquakes, failed crops, these were the consequences of disrespecting the living landscape. So, the careful, spiritual persuasion of the stone was as crucial to the building process as the physical act of hammering it. It was their physics, their religion, and their risk management, all spat onto the rock in a wad of chewed leaves. Once the stone was fed, pacified, and finally moved to the building site, the conversation continued. The perfect fit was achieved not by softening the stone, but by a painstaking process of scribing and pounding. The stone would be lowered onto the one below it. The points where they touched would be marked with clay or dust. Then the top stone would be lifted away, and those marked points would be slowly, patiently pounded down. It would be lowered, marked, lifted, and pounded, again and again and again. Sometimes for days, until it settled into its partner like a joint in a skeleton. It was a slow, intimate dialogue between two living things. The finished wall, then, is not a silent monument. It's a tapestry of these captured spirits, a crowd of living entities forced into a new, rigid order. They have been fed, subdued, and locked into place. And this rigid order, this system of control that could bind even the spirits of the rocks, was the true foundation of the Inca Empire. It was an empire held together not just by stone, but by rope and by the sinew of its people, all tied into the same inescapable system of labor and tribute. You stand before the fortress of Sacsayhuam, on the hills overlooking Cusco. The scale is almost comical. It's so massive it feels like a work of giants. The stones here are not the neat, man-sized blocks of Machu Picchu. They are cyclopean. The largest, a behemoth of grey andesite, is estimated to weigh over 125 tons, the equivalent of about 70 cars stacked into a single, lumpy block. The zigzagging walls rise in three immense tiers up the hillside, a permanent man-made mountain range guarding the city below. The illusion is one of overwhelming power, of an empire with limitless resources and godlike strength. It looks eternal, unshakable. A statement of pure, brute force dominance. This is the empire's public face, a civilization that could command the very geology of the Andes, bending it to its will. It seems to have been built by a single, unified force, a society moving with one mind and one purpose. But this grand, unified vision is a carefully constructed fade. The reality is far more granular, more personal, and infinitely more chilling. The true building blocks of Sacsayhuam were not stones, they were people. And they were assembled and controlled with the same relentless precision as the masonry. Let's look past the giant stones and see the men shivering in the pre-dawn cold. They are not a professional army of builders. They are potters, weavers, and farmers, pulled from their homes across the vast empire. They are here to pay the most fundamental tax of the Inca world, the misa. The mita was a system of mandatory public service, a rotational labor draft. It was the engine that powered the entire empire. For a set number of months, every few years, every able-bodied man was required to leave his family, his fields, his life, and work for the state. You didn't pay your taxes in gold or corn. You paid them in time, in sweat, in the strength of your own body. You could be sent to build a road, to mine for silver, to serve in the army, or to haul stones for a fortress like this one. It was an ingenious system, allowing for the construction of thousands of miles of roads, massive temples and storehouses filled to the roof with grain. It was the social security and the public works department of its day, a system that ensured the empire could respond to any need, from famine to invasion. It was, from a distance, a model of efficiency. But get closer. Feel the rough texture of the wool tunic on your skin, the damp chill that sinks into your bones. You have been marching for weeks to get here. You are fed from the state storehouses, a monotonous diet of maize and potatoes, just enough to keep you working. You sleep in a rough stone barracks, huddled with hundreds of other men from 100 different villages, all speaking different dialects. Your foreman, your curaka, pushes you relentlessly. The work is dangerous. Remember the process? The hauling, the pounding, the risk of a slipping rope or a falling stone. And if you are injured, if you are crippled, the state will take care of you, in a way. You will be sent to a state-run home for the disabled, fed and clothed, but you will never return to your village. You will never see your family again. You become a ward of the state, a living reminder of the price of empire. And here is the most shocking part. The system was designed to break down local loyalties. Men from one province would be sent to work on a project hundreds of miles away, in a region inhabited by their traditional rivals. They were housed and worked alongside strangers, forced to rely on the Inca state for food and protection rather than their own kin. The mita was not just a way to build fortresses, it was a tool for social engineering. It atomized communities, deliberately preventing any one region from becoming powerful enough to challenge the central authority of Cusco. The empire was stitched together with these threads of displaced labor, a vast, intricate network of temporary allegiances all pointing back to the Sapa Inca. The glamorous illusion is a unified empire. The reality is a population intentionally kept off balance, a mosaic of resentful, exhausted communities whose collective strength was being systematically drained and repurposed to build their own gilded cage. Why did they accept this? Why didn't they rebel against a system that took them from their homes and worked them to the point of breaking? For one, the alternative was unthinkable. To defy the mita was to defy the Sapa Inca, the son of the sun. It was an act of cosmic rebellion that would bring not just punishment, but divine wrath upon your entire community. But more pragmatically, the Inca state also provided a kind of brutalist security. The great storehouses, filled by mita labor, ensured that no one would starve during a drought. The roads, built by mita labor, allowed the army to move swiftly to quell uprisings or defend against raids from the Amazonian tribes. The system took, but it also gave. It offered a harsh, rigid stability in a harsh, unpredictable land. The people were cogs in a great, complex machine. They might be ground down by the gears, but the machine itself kept them safe from the chaos outside. This trade personal freedom for collective security is a bargain as old as civilization itself. So, as you gaze at the colossal stones of Sacsayhuam, don't just see a fortress, see a ledger. Each stone represents thousands of man-hours. Each perfectly fitted joint represents a community's broken routine, a family's temporary loss. The entire structure is a monument to a social contract written in sweat and stone. It is the physical manifestation of a system that could mobilize millions, a testament to an empire held together by the very roads that carried its workers away from their homes, down a path that was itself a masterpiece of engineering and a marvel of deception. You are walking on the Capacan, the great Inca road. The section you're on is paved with flat, grey stones, fitted together with that familiar, mortarless precision. It's wide enough for a dozen men to walk abreast. To your left, a sheer drop into a deep river valley. To your right, A steep stone retaining wall holds back the mountainside. The road contours to the landscape, climbing through mountain passes with elegant stone stairways and crossing gorges on swaying suspension bridges woven from grass. It is an artery of empire, a marvel of engineering stretching for over 24,000 miles, from modern-day Colombia to Chile. For an empire without the wheel, this road system was everything. It was the internet, the postal service, and the interstate highway system rolled into one. The illusion is one of order, control, and seamless connectivity. A perfect, clean highway moving goods, information, and armies with unparalleled efficiency. It's the symbol of a benevolent, organized state, connecting its people and ensuring the smooth flow of a peaceful society. But this pristine highway hides a darker, more desperate reality. The road was not a gentle public thoroughfare. It was for official state business only. No commoner could walk it without permission. And its lifeblood was not the slow tread of llama caravans, but the frantic, desperate sprint of young men. These were the chasquis, the royal messengers. Let's focus on one of them. He is a boy, really, no more than 19. He is lean and wiry, chosen for his speed and endurance. He is standing at a small stone hut, a tambillo, chewing a wad of coca leaves. The coca isn't for pleasure, it's medicine. It numbs the ache in his legs, dulls the pangs of hunger, and gives him a surge of artificial energy. He is listening, waiting. In the distance, he hears the sound he has been dreading, the call of a conch shell trumpet. An incoming runner. He spits out the old coca, stuffs a fresh wad into his cheek, and gets ready. A moment later, another boy, his face streaked with sweat and dust, stumbles into view. He is gasping for air, his eyes wide with exhaustion. He doesn't stop. As he runs past, he shouts a short, memorized string of words about a rebellious local leader. He also passes off a quipu, one of those knotted string records we'll explore later. Our boy doesn't have time to think. He has already started running. The message and the quipu are now his responsibility. He must carry them to the next relay station, about 1.5 miles away, as fast as he possibly can. He runs barefoot, his feet calloused and tough, gripping the stone pavers of the road. His lungs burn. The thin, high-altitude air is a constant enemy. 1.5 miles doesn't sound like much, but try running it at a dead sprint at 12,000 feet. Then imagine doing it again, and again, and again, all day long. This relay system was incredibly fast. A message could travel from Cusco to Quito, distance of over 1,200 miles in under a week. Faster than a letter could travel the same distance by train in the United States in the 19th century. But the shocking reality lies in the details. The life of a chasquoi was brutal and short. They were human sacrifices to the god of speed. Many died from sheer exhaustion, their hearts giving out on a lonely stretch of mountain road. Others fell, tumbling into the ravines the road so elegantly skirted. And the road itself was not always the clean, paved highway you imagine. The Spanish described sections of the road marked not with milestones, but with hanging bodies. Rebels, traitors, or common thieves were sometimes executed, and their bodies displayed along the Capacan as a gruesome warning to all who passed. Imagine being that young runner, sprinting through a mountain pass and seeing the desiccated, leathery remains of a man hanging from a wooden gibbet, twisting slowly in the wind. It was a clear, brutal message. This is what happens to those who defy the state. The road was not just a tool for connection, it was an instrument of terror. And what about those beautiful suspension bridges? Woven from ichu grass, they were engineering marvels. But the grass rots. Every year or two, the bridge had to be replaced. The local villagers were responsible for this task, another form of the Mita tax. The whole community would gather to twist the grass into thick cables, some as thick as a man's torso. The old bridge would be cut, falling into the gorge below, and the new one would be painstakingly hauled across. The opening of a new bridge was a time for great ceremony, with feasting and offerings to the mountain spirits. But it was also a time of great danger. A miscalculation, a snapped rope, and dozens of people could be sent plunging to their deaths. The why behind this brutal system was, once again, the Inca obsession with control. A sprawling, mountainous empire like theirs was constantly at risk of fracturing. News of a rebellion or a food shortage needed to travel faster than the discontent could spread. The chasquis were the synapses of the imperial brain, firing off messages that allowed the Sapa Inca to react with lightning speed. The public displays of punishment were a necessary form of political theatre, a constant reminder of the state's long reach and its unforgiving nature. The road wasn't built for the comfort of the people. It was built for the security of the state. Its perfection was a lie, paid for by the exhausted lungs of its runners and reinforced by the grim spectacle of its executed enemies. This blend of sophisticated engineering and brutal social control was a hallmark of the great Andean civilizations. Long before the Inca perfected it, another culture, a mysterious and powerful civilization, was building its own enigmatic monuments on the high plains near Lake Titicaca. They too built gateways to the heavens, but their method of communing with the gods they carved in stone was even more direct and far more intoxicating. You find yourself on the Altiplano, the high plain of Bolivia. The air here is thin and carries a deep, resonant chill, even under the piercingly bright sun. The sky is a vast, cobalt blue dome that seems to go on forever. Before you stands a single, monumental block of andesite, cracked and weathered by centuries of wind and frost. This is the gateway of the sun at Tiwanaku. It's not as grand as Sacsayhuam, nor as picturesquely situated as Machu Picchu. It's stark, isolated, and profoundly strange. Carved across the top is a procession of 48 winged figures, all running towards a central, imposing being, the staff god. He stares out at you with large, square eyes, holding a thunderbolt in each hand, rays of light or perhaps serpents erupting from his head. The carving is stiff, geometric, almost alien. The glamorous illusion here is one of solemn, rigid order. This was clearly a sacred place, a center of a powerful, long-vanished religion. The gateway seems to be a portal, a calendar, a cosmic map left behind by a civilization of stern, sober astronomers and priests. It feels like a place of silent, intellectual worship, a monument to a forgotten, but highly organized faith, that the silence you feel today is a modern invention. In its heyday, this plaza would have been anything but quiet, and the communion with that stern staff god was not achieved through quiet contemplation. It was achieved through a chemical shortcut to the divine. Let's peel back the stone-faced sobriety and uncover the shocking reality, the psychoactive drug paraphernalia scattered all around this sacred site. Archaeologists at Tiwanaku and surrounding areas have found an astonishing number of objects designed for one purpose: getting high. They found beautifully carved wooden and bone snuff trays, often decorated with the same winged figures you see on the gateway. They found ceramic inhalation bowls and long, thin tubes made from bird bones for snorting powdered substances. They have even analyzed the residue on these artifacts and the hair of mummified Tiwanaku elites. The results are undeniable. They were regularly consuming powerful hallucinogens. The substance of choice was likely vilca, a powder made from the toasted and ground seeds of the Anodonanthera calabrina tree. This is not a gentle, mind-expanding drug. It contains bufotenin, a potent psychedelic that can induce intense, often terrifying, visions. The process of taking it was visceral and anything but glamorous. The powder would be placed on the snuff tray. The user would then take a bone tube, place one end in their nostril, and a friend would blow forcefully on the other end, shooting the acrid powder deep into their sinus cavity. The experience was reportedly painful, causing violent sneezing, eye-watering, and a massive initial jolt. From there, the user would be catapulted into the spirit world. They would see geometric patterns, mythical beasts, and, they believed, the very gods themselves. They would become one of the winged figures on the gateway, flying towards the staff god. Imagine the scene. Not a silent plaza, but a throbbing, pulsating center of a mass psychedelic ritual. Priests, their faces painted, their nostrils raw and inflamed, presiding over the ceremony. The air is thick with the smoke of incense, the chanting of prayers, and the sounds of people retching, crying out or speaking in tongues as the vilca takes hold. The stiff, geometric figures on the gateway are not just art, they are a visual representation of the hallucinatory experience. The winged beings, the serpent-headed race, these are the things you see when your mind is unlocked by the drug. The gateway isn't just a symbol of the cosmos. It's a trip report carved in stone. The priests of Tiwanaku weren't just praying to their gods, they were dialing them up directly, using powerful entheogens to tear a hole in the fabric of reality and step through to the other side. So, why this extreme method? Why not just prayer or sacrifice? The worldview of the Tiwanaku people, like many ancient cultures, did not have a hard line between the physical and spiritual worlds. The two were interwoven, and certain plants held the key to moving between them. For them, a shaman or priest wasn't just a spiritual leader, He was a technician of the sacred. His job was to physically travel to the realm of the spirits to negotiate on behalf of the community. He needed to ask for rain, diagnose an illness, or divine the future. These were not abstract requests. They required a direct, face-to-face meeting with the supernatural powers that controlled the world. The Vilka was the vehicle for that journey. The pain, the violent entry into the trance state, was part of the ordeal, a sign of the difficulty and danger of traversing the spiritual landscape. It was a testament to the priest's power and courage. This wasn't recreational drug use, it was applied cosmology. It was the only way to get the answers, and the divine intervention their society needed to survive in the harsh environment of the Altiplano. The influence of Tiwanaku and its god, often identified as a precursor to the Inca Viracocha, spread far and wide. Their iconography, their architectural style, and almost certainly their ritual practices were adopted and adapted by other cultures, including their rivals and eventual successors, the Wari. The Wari, in turn, were masters of another form of communication, another way of encoding power and meaning, not in stone, but in thread. They wove textiles of such impossible fineness and complexity that they were considered more valuable than any metal, carrying a code that was as rigid and powerful as any stone wall. Let your fingers imagine this sensation. You are touching a textile that is over 1,000 years old. It is a tunic, woven by a master craftsperson of the Wari Empire, the powerful civilization that coexisted with and rivaled Tiwanaku before the rise of the Inca. The fabric is impossibly soft, with a silken, almost fluid feel. The colors are still astonishingly vibrant: deep crimson, brilliant turquoise, and rich gold, all drawn from natural dyes. The thread count is astronomical, finer than the most luxurious modern fabrics. It's said that some elite Inca textiles, which inherited the Wari tradition, were so fine that a single tunic could take years to weave and contained miles of thread. You hold up this Wari tunic and you see a complex pattern of repeating geometric figures, stylized puma heads, and abstract winged beings that echo the gods on the Tiwanaku gateway. The illusion is one of pure beauty and artistry. It's a piece of clothing, yes, but it's also a masterpiece of decorative art, a testament to the weaver's incredible skill and patience. It seems personal, expressive, a vibrant flash of creative genius from a lost world. But that freedom of expression is a complete fabrication. This textile is not a work of art in the way we understand it. It is a document. It is a uniform. It is a weapon. The intricate patterns are not random, nor are they the product of the weaver's whim. They are a rigid, state-controlled code. The shocking reality is that these beautiful threads were bound by a set of rules as strict and unforgiving as any law carved in stone. To wear this tunic was to broadcast your exact rank, your profession, your ethnicity, and your role within the sprawling, highly stratified Wari and later Inca empires. Think of it like a military uniform, but infinitely more detailed. The specific combination of colors, the layout of the geometric shapes to Kapu, the quality of the weave itself, all of it communicated precise information to anyone who knew how to read the code. A high-ranking general would wear a tunic with a certain set of patterns, instantly distinguishing him from a provincial administrator, whose tunic would have a different, but equally specific, set of designs. The Sapa Inca himself wore a tunic that only he was allowed to wear, woven from the finest vicua wool, which was reserved for royalty. He was said to wear an outfit only once, after which it was ceremonially burned. His identity was so sacred it couldn't be left lying around. These textiles were a visual language of power. A bureaucrat from Cusco, arriving in a newly conquered territory, wouldn't need to say a word. His tunic announced his authority before he even opened his mouth. It was a walking, wearable barcode of a person's place in the imperial machine, and the production of these textiles was just as rigidly controlled. The weavers were not free-spirited artists. The finest weavers were women, known as aklas, or chosen women. They were selected from communities across the empire at a young age, often for their beauty or skill, and taken to live in cloistered temple complexes called Aklahuezi. Here, they were wards of the state. They spent their entire lives spinning, dyeing, and weaving for the Inca elite and for religious ceremonies. It was a life of privilege. In some ways they were well fed and protected, but it was also a gilded cage. They had no personal freedom. Their creative output was dictated entirely by the needs of the state. They were human looms, weaving the very fabric of imperial control. A mistake in a pattern, a deviation from the prescribed design, would have been unthinkable. It would be like a soldier redesigning his own uniform, an act of rebellion. So, why this obsession with cloth? Why was a tunic more valuable than a nugget of gold? The answer lies in the concept of labor as value. Remember the Mita? The Inca and warrior economies were not based on currency. Their wealth was measured in their ability to command human time and energy. A complex textile was the ultimate expression of this. It represented thousands of hours of highly skilled labor, from the herding of the llamas and alpacas to the shearing of the wool, the spinning of the thread, the gathering of the dye plants, the masterly weaving itself. To own and wear such a garment was to own and display all that accumulated human effort. It was a statement of power far more profound than a piece of inert metal. The threads told a story of control, of a ruler who could command the time and skill of the most talented women in his empire, who could command the resources of distant provinces to provide the finest wools and the rarest dyes. The warrior used this system to unify a diverse and often fractious empire. By imposing a standardized set of textile patterns, they created a shared visual culture, a way for people from different regions to understand each other's status and place within the larger imperial system. It was a form of soft power, a way of weaving conquered peoples into the fabric of the state. These soft, beautiful textiles were, in their own way, as powerful and as binding as the stone walls of Sacsayhuam or the grass rope cables of an Inca bridge. They were just another medium for encoding the rigid social hierarchy that was the backbone of Andean civilization. This hierarchy was reflected in everything, from the clothes on your back to the very food you ate, which often came from terraces that were themselves marvels of engineering, fed by a substance far less glamorous than the mountain springs you might imagine. You are standing on the edge of one. A single, curved agricultural terrace, cut into the side of a mountain so steep it seems to defy gravity. Below you, dozens more terraces descend in a graceful, flowing cascade like a giant green stairway for the gods. They follow the contours of the land perfectly. Some are broad and gentle, others narrow and sharp, clinging to near vertical cliffs. From a distance, especially in the soft morning light, they look like a colossal work of landscape art. This is the glamorous illusion of Andean agriculture, a pristine, ingenious system for turning impossibly rugged terrain into a productive breadbasket. You see harmony, a deep understanding of nature, and a sustainable farming method that has worked for centuries. Places like the ruins of Pizec or Ollantaytambo are famous for these elegant Andines, which gave the Andes their name. They seem clean, green, and perfect. But I want you to take a deep breath. Not of the crisp mountain air you're imagining. I want you to breathe in the reality of what made these terraces work. Forget the smell of fresh earth and growing plants. The overwhelming scent here would have been acrid, sharp, and deeply unpleasant. It's the pungent, eye-watering stench of ammonia. It's the smell of bird droppings and llama dung, piled high and baking in the Andean sun. The shocking reality behind these beautiful green stairways is that they were powered by poop. Vast, industrial quantities of it. The soil in the high Andes is generally thin and poor in nutrients. To make these terraces fertile enough to support a massive population, the Inca and their predecessors needed fertilizer, and lots of it. Their solution was a two-pronged attack on the senses. The first was local, llama and alpaca manure. Large herds were a sign of wealth not just for their wool and meat, but for the constant supply of fertilizer they produced. Imagine corrals filled with thousands of animals, the ground thick with their droppings, which would be collected, dried, and painstakingly carried up the mountainsides to be worked into the soil of the terraces. It was a constant, back-breaking, and smelly part of the agricultural cycle. But for a super boost of nutrients, they turned to a source far more potent and far more foul. The accumulated droppings of millions of seabirds, cormorants, boobies, and pelicans who nested on the rocky, rainless islands off the coast of Peru. For thousands of years, these birds had been feasting on the rich marine life of the Humboldt Current and depositing their waste on these islands. With no rain to wash it away, the guano built up into literal mountains of desiccated, nitrogen-rich excrement, some over 150 feet deep. This was the Inca's secret weapon. Guano was so valuable, it was considered a gift from the gods. The Inca organized a massive supply chain to harvest it. Under the Mita system, laborers were sent to the coastal islands for the horrific job of digging out the guano. The air there would have been a toxic, choking cloud of ammonia dust. The work was dangerous and deeply unpleasant. The guano was then loaded onto reed boats, brought to the mainland, and then hauled by llama caravans high up into the Andes, a journey of hundreds of miles. Think about that. An entire system of logistics, labor, and transport dedicated to moving bird droppings from the sea to the mountains. The beautiful, green terraces of Machu Picchu were likely fed by this coastal guano. The glamorous illusion is a farm-to-table paradise. The reality is a system dependent on the industrial-scale harvesting of bird excrement from a hellish, stinking island and hauling it across an empire. It's a far cry from the serene image of a farmer gently tending his corn. So why go to all this trouble? Why create this vast, trans-imperial supply chain of filth? The answer is survival. The Inca Empire was a fragile construction, always at the mercy of the unpredictable Andean climate. A single hailstorm, a drought, or a frost could wipe out a region's crops, leading to famine and unrest. The terrace system, combined with this intensive fertilization, was a masterpiece of risk management. The terraces themselves were ingeniously designed. They weren't just piles of dirt. They were layered, a base of coarse stones for drainage followed by a layer of sand and gravel and topped with the precious, dung-enriched topsoil. This structure prevented erosion and allowed for precise water management. By building terraces at different altitudes, they also created a variety of microclimates, allowing them to grow different crops. A terrace near the valley floor might grow corn, while a higher one could support potatoes or quinoa. It was a way of diversifying their agricultural portfolio, ensuring that even if one crop failed, others might survive. This system allowed the Inca to feed an empire of millions, to fill their great storehouses quilcas with surplus food as a buffer against hard times. It was the foundation of their power. The Sapa Inca's ability to prevent starvation was a key source of his legitimacy. The Gano, as disgusting as it was the fuel for this engine of stability. It was a necessary, if nauseating, component of their cosmological balance. The Kamama, the Earth Mother, gave them food, but she demanded to be fed in return. The dung and Gano were the offering, the reciprocity, that kept the system in motion. They were feeding the Earth so the Earth could feed them. And the water that flowed through these terraces, carried by another network of stone channels, was not always just for irrigation. It was often something far more sacred and intoxicating. You are listening to one of the most soothing sounds in the Andean world. It is the gentle gurgle and splash of water flowing through a stone-lined channel. You can see them everywhere in the ruins of Inca cities, a network of miniature canals crisscrossing the landscape. They wind through terraces, run alongside stairways and emerge from walls as elegant stone fountains. At Tin, a site just south of Cusco, you can see a masterpiece of Inca hydrology, with water flowing through perfectly constructed channels, dropping from one level to the next in miniature waterfalls, the sound echoing through the air. The illusion is one of pristine purity and advanced sanitation. You imagine crystal-clear mountain spring water, channeled by genius engineers to provide clean drinking water for the populace and to precisely irrigate their beautiful terraces. It's a vision of a clean, orderly, and healthy society, living in harmony with the life-giving element of water. But if you were to dip your cup into one of these channels, you might be in for a surprise. What you'd be drinking might not be water at all. And it certainly wouldn't be crystal clear. The shocking reality is that many of these channels, especially during ceremonies and festivals, flowed not with water, but with chicha. This is the sacred, mildly alcoholic, and often cloudy corn beer that was the social and religious lubricant of the entire Andean world. Imagine a major festival in the heart of Cusco. The great central plaza is filled with thousands of people. The Sapa Inca presides from his golden throne. And from a central ceremonial platform, the Ushnu, golden pipes are flowing not with water, but with rivers of chicha. The canals that normally carry water through the city have been diverted and are now running with this sacred brew. People are dipping their cups, their keros, directly into the flowing stream, drinking deeply. The sound is not the gentle gurgle of a pristine spring, but the sloshing of a city-wide drinking party. The smell is not of clean water, but of fermentation, a sour, yeasty aroma hanging heavy in the air. This wasn't just a party, it was a critical state-sponsored ritual. The production of chicha was a massive industry, largely run by women, including the Iclas, those same chosen women who wove the finest textiles. The process was, to our modern sensibilities, a bit unsanitary. To start the fermentation, the sugars in the corn kernels need to be broken down. The traditional method was to have the women chew the corn, mix it with saliva, and then spit the pulpy mass into vats of warm water to ferment. The enzymes in their saliva kick-started the process. So the vast quantities of chicha consumed during these festivals were, in essence, made from the collective spit of the empire's holy women. The glamorous illusion of crystal-clear fountains is washed away by the reality of a city-wide plumbing system flowing with a beverage started with human saliva. So why would a society so obsessed with order and engineering do this? Why turn their sophisticated waterworks into a public brewery? because chicha was far more than just an alcoholic beverage. It was a sacred substance, a food, and a social obligation. In the harsh Andean environment, the calories and nutrients in chicha were a vital dietary supplement. But more importantly, it was the drink of ritual. No important event from a birth to a burial, from the start of a planting season to the end of a harvest could happen without it. Remember the offerings made to the tired stones? Chicha was their food. When a new bridge was built, it was consecrated with chicha. Before battle, soldiers would drink chicha to gain courage. For the Sapa Inca, the mass distribution of chicha was a crucial tool of governance. It was a display of his immense wealth and generosity. By providing literal rivers of the stuff, he was fulfilling his role as the benevolent father of his people, the ultimate provider. These festivals, fueled by state-sponsored chicha, were a way to reinforce social bonds and reaffirm loyalty to the empire. You would work for the state on the MIT system, and in return, the state would throw you a massive, intoxicating party where the booze literally flowed through the streets. It was part of the social contract. This act of communal, ritualized intoxication was not seen as debauchery, it was a sacred duty, a way of connecting with the gods and with each other. The chicha, made from the life-giving corn and consecrated by human essence, was poured onto the earth, Pachamama, as a libation, feeding her in the same way the Gano fed the terraces. The entire system was a cycle of consumption and reciprocity, flowing through these stone channels. The channels themselves were, of course, a mark of engineering genius. The Inca understood hydraulics with incredible sophistication. They could move water or chicha exactly where they wanted it, controlling the flow to create specific sounds and visual effects. The fountains were not just for drinking, they were part of the sacred soundscape of the city, but their purpose was flexible. They could be a source of life-giving water one day, and a conduit for ritual intoxication the next. This duality perfectly captures the Inca worldview, practical and mystical, sober and ecstatic, all at once. And just as these channels carried the flow of liquid information, another, far more enigmatic system was used to carry the data that truly held the empire together. A strange and beautiful system of knotted strings. You are holding a strange object, given to you by that exhausted Chaskai runner on the Inca road. It feels soft and organic in your hands. It's a quipu, a central cord, made of cotton or camelid fiber, from which dozens, sometimes hundreds, of smaller strings hang like a fringe. The strings are a riot of different colors: white, yellow, blue, and they are covered in a complex series of knots. Some are simple overhand knots, others are figure eights, some are long knots with multiple turns. You run your fingers over them. The texture is rough, the meaning utterly opaque. This is the great intellectual mystery of the Inca. They managed a vast, complex empire without a system of writing as we know it. The quipu was their solution. The glamorous illusion is that of a beautiful, abstract art object, a tactile sculpture, or perhaps a simple memory aid, a primitive abacus for counting lamas or bushels of corn. It seems charmingly rustic, a quaint solution to the problem of record keeping. But this is no mere abacus, and it is certainly not art. This soft, fibrous object in your hands is as complex and as cold as any modern spreadsheet. The shocking reality is that the quipu was a sophisticated, three-dimensional information storage system, capable of recording not just numbers, but narratives, histories, and, most chillingly, the precise accounting of human lives owed to the state. We are still in the process of deciphering them, but what we know is already staggering. The knots, their position on the string, the type of knot, the color of the string, and even the direction of the ply of the string's twist, all of it contained specific information. The Inca used a base -10 system, so the knots could represent numbers up to 10,000. But that was just the beginning. Let's look at the quipu in your hands more closely. The colors are a code. A yellow string might represent gold, or corn. A red string could signify a soldier, or a battle. White might mean silver, or peace. But a red string tied to a white string could mean a truce after a battle. The combinations were almost limitless. The men who could read and create these were called quipucameocs, the keepers of the knots. They were the accountants and historians of the empire, a highly trained class of specialists. They could read the strings with their fingertips, a form of tactile data entry. A quipucameoc could look at a quipu and tell you exactly how many people lived in a certain village, how many were men, how many were women, how many were old enough to work, how many were children. And this is where the reality becomes grim. That quipu you received from the runner? Let's say its red strings meticulously record the number of able-bodied men in a newly conquered province. The yellow strings record the amount of maize tribute they owe. And a series of small, black strings attached to the main cord. Those might be a tally of rebels who were executed after the conquest. This wasn't just census data. This was a tool of absolute control. The Quipper tracked the Mitter labor tax with terrifying precision. It recorded who had served, who was due to serve, and who had defaulted. It was a ledger of human debt to the state. A provincial leader couldn't lie about his population to reduce his tribute, because the Quipucamayok from Cusco would show up with last year's Quipu and compare the numbers. It was an audit, conducted with knotted strings. For the common person, the arrival of the Quipucamayok would have been a moment of high anxiety, the equivalent of a tax inspector showing up at your door. So why develop this strange, tactile system instead of writing? The answer is both practical and deeply philosophical. In a multilingual empire, a pictographic or phonetic writing system would have been difficult to implement. But a numerical system, a code, could be universally understood by the trained elite regardless of the local language. Furthermore, the Quipu was portable and durable in the mountainous terrain, but on a deeper level, it reflects the Andean worldview. Information was not something abstract and flat, to be written on a page. It was three-dimensional, textural, something to be held and felt. It was interwoven, just like the threads of a textile. The knots themselves were significant. To tie a knot was to bind something, to fix it in place. The Quipper literally bound the people of the empire to the state through a web of recorded obligations. The Spanish, when they arrived, were baffled and deeply suspicious of the Quippers. They saw them as works of the devil. They understood that these knotted cords were the source of the Incas' organizational power. In their efforts to destroy the old religion and social order, they burned vast numbers of them. It was an act of cultural vandalism on a massive scale, the equivalent of burning every library, every government archive in an entire country. Only a few hundred Quippers survive today, their secrets still largely locked away. Each one is a ghost of that vast, vanished system of control. A system that allowed the Inca to manage their empire from the center, but which was ultimately enforced by stone fortresses built on the empire's fringes, in places like the cloud-wreathed mountains of the north, where another, older culture had created a fortress of their own. You are pushing through thick, damp vegetation. The air is heavy with the smell of wet earth and orchids. You are not on the high, arid plains anymore. You are in the cloud forests of northern Peru, a rugged, transitional zone where the Andes begin to drop into the Amazon basin. Mist swirls around you, and strange, brightly colored birds flit through the canopy. After a steep climb, you emerge onto a flattened ridge. And there, rising out of the mist, are the walls. They are immense, 60 feet high in some places, built from massive blocks of limestone. But unlike the precise, geometric stonework of the Inca, these walls are rougher, more organic, filled with a rubble core. They encircle the entire mountaintop, a three-tiered fortification over a kilometer long. This is Kulap, the great citadel of the Chacapoya people, the warriors of the clouds. The glamorous illusion is that of a mighty fortress, a pre-Inca bastion against their aggressive neighbors, the Inca included. It looks like a classic military stronghold, a place of soldiers, battles, and strategic defense, a lost castle in the sky. But as you pass through one of the narrow, defensible entryways, the scene inside shatters this military illusion. The interior is not a parade ground or a barracks. It is a dense, bewildering forest of stone houses, 420 of them, to be precise. And they are all circular. They are packed together so tightly there is barely room to walk between them. Some are decorated with zigzag and rhomboid phrases, symbols of the Chacapoya. It feels less like a fortress and more like a crowded, Stone Age village that has been crammed inside a massive defensive wall. It's strange and a little claustrophobic. Now, step inside one of these round houses. The air is still and cool. And this is where the shocking reality sets in. As your eyes adjust to the dim light, you see that the stone floor is not empty. In niches carved into the walls and buried directly beneath the floor where the family would have eaten and slept, are the dead. They are not in a separate cemetery. They are right here. The bones of parents, grandparents, and ancestors going back generations are incorporated into the very fabric of the home. Skeletons are curled in the fetal position, often wrapped in textiles, their presence a constant, silent part of daily life. Imagine living in this small, circular space. You cook your meals, you weave your cloth, you raise your children, and all the while, your great-grandmother's skull is gazing at you from a niche in the wall. Every time you walk across the floor, you are walking over the graves of your kin. This wasn't a sign of disrespect. It was the complete opposite. For the Chachapoya, like many Andean peoples, the line between the living and the dead was permeable. Ancestors were not gone. They were simply in a different state of being. They remained active, powerful members of the family and the community. They had to be consulted on important decisions. They had to be fed with offerings of food and chichi. Keeping their physical remains within the home was the most direct way to maintain this crucial relationship. Their bones were a source of power, legitimacy, and spiritual protection. The family drew its strength and its identity from this continuous presence of the past. To bury them in a distant cemetery would have been like abandoning a living, breathing, and very powerful relative. It would have been an act of profound negligence, severing the family from its roots. So why the massive walls? If this was a residential and ceremonial center, why build it like an impregnable fortress? The answer lies in the nature of Chachapoya society and their relationship with their neighbors. The warriors of the clouds were not a unified empire like the Inca. They were a confederation of different chiefdoms, often fighting amongst themselves. The walls were likely for defense against each other as much as against outsiders. But on a deeper level, the walls were protecting what was most valuable to them, not gold or territory, but their ancestors. These mountaintop citadels were sacred lineages made manifest. They were physical representations of a family's history and power, anchored by the bones buried within. To conquer a place like Kualap wasn't just to win a battle, it was to capture the enemy's entire ancestral line, to seize their source of spiritual power. The Inca, when they finally conquered the Chachapoya in the 15th century after a long and brutal struggle, understood this. They often forcibly removed the mummies of conquered peoples and took them back to Cusco, a form of spiritual hostage-taking. Kualap, then, is not just a fortress. It's a necropolis, a city of the living built literally on top of a city of the dead. The Great Walls were not just to keep enemies out. They were to keep the sacred ancestors in. It was a giant, communal mausoleum, pulsing with the life of a people who did not see death as an end, but as a transition. This intimate, daily cohabitation with the dead feels unsettling to us, but for the Chachapoya, it was the logical core of their existence. The presence of the dead was a comfort and a strength. However, the Inca took this veneration of the dead to an even more extreme and heartbreaking conclusion. They didn't just live with their dead. They sometimes chose who would die, sending their most perfect children on a one-way journey to a frozen mountain peak near the summit of Lulalaco, a volcano on the border of Argentina and Chile. At over 22,000 feet, it is one of the highest archaeological sites in the world. The air is dangerously thin, a knife edge of cold that freezes the moisture in your lungs. The landscape is a brutal, barren world of rock and ice under a dark, star-filled sky. There is no life here. Nothing grows. And yet, it was here, in 1999, that archaeologists made a discovery that was both breathtakingly beautiful and deeply disturbing. They found 3 small burial sites. Inside one, sitting cross-legged as if in sleep, was the body of a young girl, about 13 years old. Her preservation was perfect. She was not a leathery mummy, not a skeleton. Her skin was soft, her arms still had fine hair, her face was serene, with a gentle swelling on one cheek where she had been chewing a wad of coca. She was dressed in the finest textiles, a beautiful tunic and shawl, with an elaborate headdress of white feathers. She became known as the Maiden of Lulalaco. The glamorous illusion is one of serenity and peace. She looks like a sleeping princess, a holy child who has entered a state of suspended animation, perfectly preserved by the mountain's icy embrace. It's a hauntingly beautiful image of a sacred, peaceful death. But let's shatter this serene picture. There is nothing peaceful about this. The reality is that this young girl, along with her 2 younger companions found nearby, was a human sacrifice. She was a victim of the Kepakoka, one of the most important and solemn ceremonies in the Inca Empire. The Kepakoka was performed at times of great crisis, the death of an emperor, a terrible famine, a military defeat to celebrate a great victory. The empire, they believed, had fallen out of balance with the cosmos, and a great debt had to be paid to the gods. And the most precious, most perfect offering they could make was the life of a perfect child. Let's trace the maiden's final journey. She was likely chosen a year or more before her death, selected from a noble family in a far-flung province of the empire. She would have been chosen for her physical perfection, no blemishes, no scars. From the moment she was chosen, her life transformed. She was elevated to a near-divine status, pampered and honored. She would have been taken to Cusco, the heart of the empire, to participate in feasts and ceremonies, to be blessed by the Sapa Inca himself. She was no longer just a girl. She was a living offering, a sacred object. Then came the final pilgrimage. A procession of priests, dignitaries, and the chosen children would walk for weeks, even months, covering hundreds of miles from Cusco to the designated sacred mountain, the Apu, that would receive the sacrifice. The journey itself was a major religious event, passing through villages where people would come out to worship the child. But imagine being that girl, surrounded by solemn adults, walking further and further from everything you have ever known. Analysis of her hair, which provides a timeline of her diet, shows that in the final year of her life, she was fed the high-status food of the elite, maize and llama meat. In her final weeks, she was heavily sedated. She was given massive amounts of coca leaves to chew and was made to drink large quantities of chicha. The final ascent of the mountain would have been brutal. The cold, the altitude sickness, the sheer physical effort. By the time she reached the summit, she would have been exhausted, disoriented, and heavily intoxicated. The priests would place her in her small, stone-lined tomb, along with offerings of small golden statues, pottery, and bags of food for her journey into the next world. And then, she was left alone. The maiden likely did not die a violent death. She was so heavily drugged with corned beer and her system so numbed by the coca and the extreme cold, she simply fell into a final, deep sleep and succumbed to hypothermia. She froze to death, alone, on top of a desolate mountain. The serene look on her face is not one of peace. It is the face of a child who was drugged into a stupor and left to die in the coldest, loneliest place imaginable. So, why this heartbreaking ritual? What could possibly justify it? To the Inca, this was not murder. It was an honor. The child was not dying, but being transformed. She was becoming a divine intermediary, a messenger to the gods who would live forever in the company of the mountain spirits, watching over and protecting her people. Her family would be elevated in status, revered for having provided such a precious gift to the state and the cosmos. The Kepakoka was the ultimate act of reciprocity. In a universe that was a constant, delicate negotiation, sometimes the stakes were so high that the only offering valuable enough to rebalance the scales was a pure, unblemished human life. It was the ultimate expression of the empire's power, the ability to command not just the labor of its subjects, but their very lives, and to frame that ultimate sacrifice as a sacred, glorious destiny. It was a fusion of political power and religious fervor, a social contract written in the frozen blood of a child. This act of supreme sacrifice stands in stark contrast to the daily life of the common family. They too lived in a world dictated by the need for survival, huddling together for warmth in their simple stone homes, where the greatest daily threat was not a divine decree, but the simple, choking smoke from their own hearth let step away from the grand temples and the frozen peaks and into the home of an ordinary Inca family. Picture a small, sturdy house, one of thousands that would have made up the residential quarters of a place like Ollantaytambo or even the lower status areas of Cusco. The walls are made of fieldstone, rougher than the fine masonry of the temples, but solid and strong. It has a single room, a high-pitched roof of thatch, and no windows. The doorway is low, forcing you to stoop to enter. The glamorous illusion here is one of rustic, cozy simplicity. You imagine a fire crackling merrily in a central hearth, a family gathered around it, sharing stories, the warm glow illuminating their faces. It's a picture of humble, pastoral charm, simple, sturdy life of the Andean farmer, a life of hard work. Yes, but also of warm, familial comfort. Now, duck through that low doorway and let the reality hit you. The first thing you notice is that you can't see. The room is filled with thick, greasy smoke. There is no chimney. The smoke from the cooking fire simply hangs in the air, slowly seeping out through the gaps in the thatch roof. Your eyes burn, you start to cough, and the smell is an overwhelming mix of burning wood, singed guinea pig fur, and the damp, musty odor of unwashed bodies and earth. The fire is not for ambience. It's the only source of heat, and the only way to cook. And where is the family? They are not sitting on charming wooden stools. There is no furniture. They are huddled together in a pile on the earthen floor, on a bed of ichu grass or animal skins. Parents, children, maybe even a grandparent or two, all sleeping together in a single heap for shared warmth against the biting cold of the Andean night. This wasn't a choice. It was a necessity. In a world without central heating, the human body was the most reliable furnace. And look around the room. In one corner, you'll see a small, stone-lined pen. But it's not for a beloved pet dog. It's for the guinea pigs. Kai, as they are known in Quechua. To the Inca, guinea pigs were not pets. They were a primary source of protein. They lived, bred, and defecated inside the family's single-room home. Their soft squeaks and rustles would have been a constant background noise. When it was time for a meal, a woman would simply reach into the pen, grab one, and dispatch it. The cozy image of a family hearth is replaced by the reality of living in a smoke-filled room that doubled as a barnyard, surrounded by your future meals. This lack of sanitation extended to everything. There was no plumbing, no concept of a separate bathroom. People relieved themselves outside, in designated areas or simply in the fields. Waste would have been a constant presence, and the associated smells and health risks were just a part of life. The skeletal remains of ordinary Inca people often show the harsh realities of this lifestyle. Their lungs are blackened from a lifetime of smoke inhalation, leading to chronic respiratory diseases. Their bones show signs of nutritional stress and back-breaking labor. Their teeth are often worn down from the grit that was ever present in their stone-ground food. The simple life was, in reality, a constant, grinding struggle against cold, hunger, and disease. So why live like this, in conditions that we would consider intolerably squalid? The answer is a worldview centered on efficiency and community, not on individual comfort. The one-room house was thermally efficient. A small fire and shared body heat were enough to make the cold night survivable. Having the guinea pigs inside protected them from predators and the cold, safeguarding a vital food source. The lack of a chimney, while terrible for the lungs, kept precious heat from escaping. Every aspect of the design, as uncomfortable as it seems to us, was a pragmatic adaptation to a harsh environment with limited resources. Furthermore, the concept of privacy as we know it was largely absent. In the Andean worldview of Alu, the community, the collective, was paramount. Your identity was tied to your family and your village, not to your individual self. The idea of needing a separate room for yourself would have been strange, even antisocial. Huddling together was not just for warmth, it was a physical expression of the communal bond that was the bedrock of their society. They faced the world together, and they faced the cold nights together, in a single smoky room. Their lives were not about personal accumulation or comfort. They were about contributing to the whole. And the most prized material in their world was not something that could make them comfortable, but something that represented the very essence of the divinia metal that was symbolically priceless, but practically useless. Let your mind conjure the most famous image of Inca wealth. You are standing in the Coricancha, the Golden Courtyard, the most sacred temple in all of Cusco. In its heyday, this was the center of the Inca universe. The walls, built with that mesmerizingly perfect stonework, were said to have been covered in sheets of solid gold. In the courtyard, there was a garden. But this was no ordinary garden. It was a life-sized replica of the natural world, crafted entirely from gold and silver. There were golden llamas with silver-fleeced young, tended by golden shepherds. There was a field of corn, each stalk, leaf, and cob fashioned from gleaming gold. There were golden butterflies perched on golden flowers, golden birds in golden trees, even golden snakes slithering through the precious metal soil. The glamorous illusion is one of almost unimaginable opulence. An empire so rich it could afford to create a whimsical, useless garden out of the world's most coveted substance. It's the image that drove the Spanish conquistadors mad with greed, a city literally paved with gold. But this vision of wealth is a profound European misunderstanding. The shocking reality is that to the Inca, gold had no monetary value whatsoever. It was not currency. You could not use it to buy a loaf of bread, a plot of land, or a llama. It was not used for trade. A finely woven tunic or a handful of dried coca leaves was infinitely more valuable in any practical transaction. The entire golden garden of the Coricancha, which would be worth billions of dollars today, could not have purchased a single meal for a commoner. Its value was purely spiritual and symbolic. Let's break down this bizarre-seeming economic reality. The Inca called gold the sweat of the sun. Silver was the tears of the moon. These metals were not commodities, they were divine emanations, sacred substances that belonged to the gods and their representative on earth, the Sapa Inca. To possess gold was to possess a piece of the sun god, Inti. The goldsmiths who worked it were not just artisans, they were more like priests, performing a sacred duty. The metal was mined through the Mitalaba system, brought to Cusco, and transformed into these divine objects, but it never entered a marketplace. It flowed in one direction only, from the earth, to the state workshops, to the temples and the body of the Sapa Inca. It was a closed circuit of sacredness. Imagine a Spanish conquistador, his mind filled with dreams of ransom and riches, seeing this golden garden for the first time. He sees portable wealth, a shortcut to power and nobility back in Spain. He sees monetary value. The Inca priest standing next to him sees something completely different. He sees the collected essence of his primary god. To melt it down, to turn it into featureless bars or coins, was not just vandalism, it was a profound act of sacrilege. It was like taking the consecrated bread of communion and trying to use it to buy a horse. The concepts were completely incompatible. The Spanish saw gold as a means to an end. For the Inca, gold was the ender way to bring the divine power of the sun into the human world. This is why they were so willing, at first, to give it to the Spanish. When the conquistador Francisco Pizarro captured the Sapa Inca Atahualpa famously offered to fill a room with gold and twice over with silver in exchange for his freedom. The Spanish were ecstatic. The Inca were perplexed. Atahualpa wasn't offering his treasury in the European sense. He was offering to gather up the sacred decorations from his temples and palaces. To him, it was like offering to strip the paint off a church. It was a significant religious concession, yes, but he wasn't bankrupting his empire. He couldn't imagine that these crude, bearded men valued this divine sweat more than they valued food, textiles, or political power. He fatally misjudged their worldview. He thought they were just strange, greedy barbarians. He didn't realize their greed was for the very substance he considered spiritually priceless, but functionally worthless. The tragedy of the conquest is, in part, the story of this catastrophic failure to understand each other's definition of value. The ultimate irony is that while a golden statue was useless for daily life, a simple stone tool was essential. A Neolithic-level technologist stone hammer used to shape the walls of the Coricancha, the stone hoe used to till the fields, the stone spindle haul used to spin thread. These were the technologies that actually kept the empire running. The Inca were masters of stone and fiber, not metal in a practical sense. Their empire was built on a Stone Age foundation, but adorned with the divine sweat of a sun they believed they could capture and control. This beautiful, glittering, but ultimately fragile worldview was about to collide with a worldview that was brutally pragmatic, a world where the metal that mattered was not the soft, sacred gold, but the hard, cold steel of a sword. Picture the scene. It is the city of Cajamarca, in the highlands of Peru, November 16th, 1532. The great square is empty, unnervingly quiet. Along the sides of the square, in the low stone buildings, Francisco Pizarro and his 168 conquistadors are hiding. They are grimy, terrified men, thousands of miles from home, about to confront an emperor they believe to be a god. The air is thick with tension. Then, the procession begins. Atahualpa, the Sapa Inca, enters the square, carried high on a magnificent litter adorned with gold, silver, and parrot feathers. He is surrounded by thousands of his retainers and warriors, clad in brightly colored textiles, their ceremonial weapons glinting in the sun. It is a spectacle of overwhelming power and confidence. The glamorous illusion is of a classic clash of civilizations, the mighty, populous Inca Empire, with its divine ruler and legions of warriors, versus a tiny, desperate band of European adventurers. It seems an impossible fight, a foregone conclusion. The Incas' living stone, their vast numbers, their divine mandate, against a handful of mortals. But what happens next is a shocking, brutal reversal. Pizarro gives the signal. A cannon fires. The Spanish cavalry, clad in steel armor, charge into the square. The sound of the horses, animals the Inca have never seen before, creates panic. The Spanish infantry fire their harquebuses, crude firearms that are more terrifying for their noise and smoke than their accuracy. They wade into the mass of unarmed or lightly armed Inca retainers, their Toledo steel swords flashing. The reality is not a battle, it is a slaughter. In the space of 2 hours, thousands of Inca are killed. Not a single Spaniard dies. Atahualpa is pulled from his litter and taken captive. The greatest empire in the Americas is decapitated in a single, bloody afternoon. The steel sword, the horse, the armor, these are the obvious, shocking advantages. An Inca warrior with a stone-headed mace or a bronze axe stood no chance against a man on horseback with a steel longsword. The Inca fought to capture and subdue. The Spanish fought to kill. It was a technological and tactical mismatch of staggering proportions. The image of that living, breathing, sacred world of the Inca being shattered by the cold, hard reality of European steel is a powerful one. But steel was not the deadliest weapon the Europeans brought. The most destructive conqueror was silent, invisible, and had arrived years before Pizarro. The shocking, and far more gruesome, reality is that the Inca Empire was already rotting from within, hollowed out by a force it could not see, fight, or comprehend: disease. Smallpox, measles, influenza. These common European illnesses, to which the conquistadors had developed centuries of immunity, were utterly alien to the Americas. When they arrived, they swept through the population like wildfire. Years before Pizarro's arrival, a smallpox epidemic, likely travelling overland from the Caribbean, had already devastated the Inca Empire. It killed the reigning Sapa Inca, Huayna Capac, and his chosen heir. This is what triggered the devastating civil war between his two sons, Atahualpa and Huáscar, a war that Pizarro brilliantly exploited. By the time the Spanish marched into Cajamarca, the empire was already politically fractured and demographically ravaged. Some historians estimate that up to 90% of the population of the Americas died from Old World diseases. 90%. It is the greatest demographic catastrophe in human history. Imagine vibrant cities like Cusco suddenly falling silent, houses filled not with the smoky warmth of families, but with the dead and dying. Fields left untended. The complex systems of the Mita, the Chaskai runners, the terrace farming, all of it collapsed because the people who made it work were gone. The Inca worldview, based on reciprocity with the gods, was thrown into chaos. Their gods had either abandoned them or were powerless against this new, invisible enemy. The priests performed their rituals, the sacrifices were made, but the pestilence continued unabated. This psychological blow was perhaps as devastating as the physical one. The living stones of their temples remained, but the living sinew of their society had been dissolved. So why was this impact so one-sided? Why didn't Inca diseases wipe out the Spanish? The answer lies in animal husbandry and the grimy reality of European cities. For centuries, Europeans had lived in close, unsanitary quarters with their domesticated animals: pigs, cows, sheep, chickens. These animals were the original source of many of humanity's worst plagues. The constant, low-level exposure over generations had allowed Europeans to build up antibodies. The Americas, by contrast, had very few domesticated animals. The llama and the guinea pig did not carry the same kind of epidemic-level pathogens. The population was, in immunological terms, a blank slate. So when we see the clash at Cajamarca, we are not just seeing living stone meet cold steel. We are seeing the tragic culmination of two completely different epidemiological histories. Pizarro and his men were the hardened, unwitting survivors of a long, dirty war against germs, and they carried that bioweapon inside them. The Inca, for all their sophisticated social engineering and monumental architecture, were tragically, fatally clean. Their world, built on a delicate balance with the visible forces of nature, was shattered by the invisible forces of microbiology. Their great cities, once centers of power, fell silent. And in their silence, they became something else, places of memory, of tourism, and for some places where the old ways, the old echoes, can still be heard in the modern mountain air. You are back where we started, at Machu Picchu, but it is no longer the pre-dawn hour of mystical silence. It is midday. The sun is high and hot. The golden illusion is gone, replaced by the stark grey of stone and the vibrant green of the grass on the terraces, and you are not alone. The city is thronging with people. Hundreds of them. They are tourists from every corner of the world. A river of brightly coloured jackets and clicking cameras flowing through the ancient stone arteries. They listen to guides reciting memorized facts through headsets. They pose for selfies with llamas that have been trained to be docile props. The glamorous illusion now is that of preservation. UNESCO World Heritage Site, carefully managed, beautifully maintained, a lost city found and now saved for all humanity to appreciate. It feels like a museum, a static, silent monument to a civilization that is safely and completely in the past. But listen carefully. Move away from the main plaza, away from the crowds taking the iconic photo. Find a quiet corner, perhaps near a rock outcrop that the guides ignore. Look for the small, almost unnoticeable signs. A tiny, scattered pile of coca leaves tucked into a crevice in a sacred rock. A small, dark stain on the ground where a libation of chicha, or perhaps modern beer, was discreetly poured. These are the shocking, or rather, the quiet and resilient reality. The old ways are not dead. The conversation with the living mountain has never truly stopped. For the local Quechua people, the descendants of the Inca who still live in the villages surrounding these ancient sites, this is not just a tourist attraction. It is not a ruin. The mountains, the great apus that loom over the city, Huayna Picchu and Machu Picchu Mountain itself, are still powerful, living deities. The stones are still imbued with spirit. And the rituals of reciprocity, of Aini, are still practiced, albeit in a more subtle, modern form. A local guide, after finishing his official, historical spiel for the tourists, might turn away for a moment and quietly murmur a prayer in Quechua to the Apu, offering a few coca leaves as a sign of respect, asking for permission to be there, to bring outsiders into this sacred space. A farmer working in a field in the valley below will still pour out the first splash of his drink onto the ground for Pachamama before he takes a sip himself. This is not a performance for tourists. It is a deeply ingrained part of a worldview that has survived 500 years of conquest, suppression, and modernization. The Spanish tried to stamp it out, to replace the apus with saints and the sun god with crest. But the old beliefs simply went underground, blending with the new religion in a process called syncretism. A cross might be placed on a mountaintop, but for many locals, that cross is just a new face for the ancient Apo that lives within the mountain. They are honoring both at the same time. The rituals have adapted. Instead of grand state ceremonies with rivers of chicha, it is a personal, quiet offering. But the fundamental principle remains the same. The world is alive, and you must maintain a balanced, respectful relationship with it. You must feed the earth. You must honor the spirits of place, if you want to live well. This quiet, persistent reality is a world away from the commercialized spirituality sold in the markets of Cusco, with its mass-produced textiles and shamanic ceremonies for tourists. This is something deeper, more authentic. It is the echo of the beliefs that made these cities possible in the first place. The belief that stones are alive, that mountains are gods, that reciprocity is the law of the universe. The tourist sees a beautiful ruin. The local sees a powerful, living entity that must be treated with caution and respect. The shocking truth is that for many, this lost city was never truly lost. It was just sleeping. So, as you stand there, amidst the noise and the crowds, you are witnessing two completely different realities occupying the same space. There is the sanitized, historical narrative of the tourist industry, and then there is the quiet, continuous spiritual life of the place itself. The very ground beneath your feet is both a historical artifact and a living god. The stones you lean against are both an archaeological treasure and a potential source of spiritual power. The survival of this worldview is perhaps the most incredible legacy of the Inca and their predecessors. Their empire was shattered, their population decimated, their gold melted down. But the core of their belief system, that profound, intimate connection to the living landscape, has proven to be more durable than any stone wall. It whispers in the wind, it is hidden in the crevices of the rocks, and it continues to shape the lives of the people who call these mountains home. The sun begins to dip towards the western peaks, and the crowds begin to thin out. A softer, warmer light returns to the stones, reminiscent of that first golden ray of sunrise. The day trippers are heading back to their hotels in the town below, their digital memories full. But for the mountain, for the spirits that reside here, it is just another turning of the sun, another moment in a cycle that stretches back for millennia. The stones settle in for the cold night, waiting, listening. The echoes of the past are not just echoes, they are living conversations, happening right now, if you only know how to listen. And now, as our own journey comes to a close, let the noise and the crowds fade completely from your mind. Let the sharp edges of the stone soften, and allow the gentle hum of the wind over the high peaks to be the only sound you hear. The story of these cities is a story of immense power and breathtaking beauty, but it is also a story of bone-deep effort, of lives spent in service to an idea carved in rock and woven in thread. It is a story that reminds us that beneath every grand illusion, there is a human reality, often harder and stranger than we can imagine. Let that thought drift away now, like mist in the Andean valleys. Allow the rhythm of your own breathing to become your focus, slow and deep. The sharp mountain air is replaced by the soft warmth of your bed. The weight of history lifts, leaving only a sense of quiet and peace. The stones are sleeping. The mountains are watching. And you can let go, drifting into your own quiet rest, into the soft landscape of your own dreams. There are no more steps to climb tonight. There is only the gentle descent into a deep and well-deserved sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.